Stephen Colbert walked out to his usual applause. The lights caught his grin. The music caught his rhythm. And for the first 3 minutes, everything felt like it always did. Crisp, clever, safe. He landed his monologue with a tight final line, then stepped toward the guest desk. His voice dipped into that familiar, ironic cadence. Tonight's guest is Karoline Leavitt, communications strategist, conservative voice, and, some would say, a walking contradiction in pearls. Laughter, but not too loud. More curiosity than mockery. Stephen adjusted his cards. She's here tonight wearing a symbol that's older than the culture war, but newer, apparently, to primetime debates. Let's find out if it's armor or something else. Applause again. The camera cut wide. Karoline Leavitt walked into the frame. She wasn't dressed for battle. She was dressed like she always was. Simple blazer, muted tones, hair pulled back, and a silver cross resting at the collar. Not big, not bold, but unmistakable. She shook Stephen's hand. Polite, not soft. They sat. He welcomed her with a quick smile. Thanks for coming into the lion's den, he said, mock sinister. Karoline smiled back. Thanks for not pretending the lion wears a tie. The audience laughed, but something in the room tightened. Because she wasn't joking. Stephen leaned in. I'll get to the obvious, he said. You're wearing a cross. You wore one last week on another network, too. That clip got a lot of attention. Karoline nodded. I noticed. Stephen continued. Some people said it was performative. Some said it was brave. Others said it was bait. What do you say it was? Karoline didn't blink. I say it was mine. Stephen raised an eyebrow. Not hostile, just curious. And what does it mean to wear it on national television? In a political moment? In a media machine? With cameras and reaction buttons and Twitter threads waiting. Karoline didn't flinch. It means the same thing it means off camera. Unless you're the kind of person who only believes in something when no one can see it. That line landed. Not loud, just heavy. The audience didn't clap. Stephen didn't pivot. He pressed. Would you say the cross is part of your platform? Karoline answered. No, but it's part of what keeps me from becoming the platform. Stephen nodded slowly. Interesting answer. But let me ask you plainly. Do you expect people to read it as political? Karoline said. I don't expect them to read it at all. I expect them to see it. What they do with it after that is their story, not mine. Stephen paused. No joke. No turn. Just stillness. Then he asked. But you're a public figure. Doesn't that mean your symbols are part of your strategy? Karoline's voice didn't rise. It means I wear what I don't want edited. And if faith is one of the few things that still makes people uncomfortable on both sides, maybe it says more about them than about me. There was no laugh track. The room wasn't quiet because it was confused. It was quiet because it had expected a fight and got a mirror instead. Stephen finally exhaled through his nose. He wasn't losing, but he wasn't driving. He said, You know the narrative, right? Woman wears cross on air, becomes proxy for the right, gets applauded, criticized, commodified. You've seen this movie. Karoline replied. I've seen it. I just didn't agree to star in it. Stephen's pen tapped the card once. He was used to discomfort. He wasn't used to silence that didn't need defending. So he asked, Do you think people are afraid of religion and politics? Karoline said, I think people are afraid of people who don't flinch when their beliefs don't match the room. Stephen Colbert shifted in his chair. He wasn't rattled. He was recalculating. The segment was only halfway through, and Karoline Leavitt wasn't playing her part. She hadn't defended herself. She hadn't turned defiant. She was doing something far more difficult. She was staying still. Stephen leaned in, the pen now tucked between his fingers. You know I asked this not to mock, he said, voice calm. But you have to admit, wearing a cross, front and center, on cable news during a national controversy, that doesn't read as incidental. Karoline nodded. I didn't come here to argue with the read, she said. But I didn't come here to edit it either. Stephen tilted his head. So you're saying it wasn't a signal? Karoline answered. Everything's a signal to someone. The question is who you're signaling to, and whether they earned your voice. The audience was silent again. Not confused. Just aware that the rhythm was gone. And what replaced it didn't need a laugh to be heard. Stephen asked, Do you believe your faith belongs in politics? Karoline replied, I believe people belong in politics. And people don't walk into the room empty. He pressed. But faith is powerful. You understand that, right? It persuades. It divides. It carries weight. She answered. So does silence. So does fear. So does performance. We don't ban those. Stephen nodded slowly. The audience didn't clap. It wasn't a line. It was an answer that didn't need applause to land. Let me push you a little, he said. There are people watching right now who've seen that symbol used to justify exclusion. Oppression. Shame. Doesn't that history carry consequence? Karoline breathed in, then said, It does. And it should. But that history doesn't own me. And it doesn't own the shape of this cross on my neck. Stephen waited. Karoline continued. If the only people allowed to wear a symbol are the ones who've never seen it abused, then we'd all be walking around empty. That hit something deeper. The audience didn't stir. Stephen didn't pivot. He asked, So what does it mean to you right now? Karoline's voice was quieter now, not soft. Still, it means I answer to something that doesn't disappear when the commercial break starts. Stephen set the pen down, not for effect, for rest. She wasn't letting him win the segment, but she wasn't trying to win it either. And that's what made it hard. He said, So you're not here to defend yourself? Karoline answered, I don't need to. I came wearing what keeps me honest. If that unsettles the room can sit with that. Stephen Colbert looked at Karoline Leavitt, then at the audience, then back at the cross around her neck. There was nothing performative left in the moment, just stillness, and a question no one had scripted yet. He said, You said it keeps you honest. Karoline nodded. Stephen continued, But what does that actually mean? Not the politics, not the press. You, the person. Karoline paused, and the pause didn't stretch. It rooted. She said, It means I have to carry myself like someone who answers to something higher than polls, platforms, or applause. It means I don't speak unless I can hear myself afterward. It means when I walk out of this building tonight, I have to live with how I sat in this chair. Stephen didn't interrupt. He just waited. Karoline added, The cross doesn't give me authority. It gives me boundaries. And on nights like this, it reminds me I don't have to say everything, just the truth. The audience didn't move. Someone in the second row swallowed hard. A camera operator behind the lens forgot to adjust the zoom, because no one expected the moment to hold. But it did. Stephen spoke again, slowly. Do you think people misunderstand why you wear it? Karoline answered, I think they need to. Stephen raised an eyebrow. Karoline continued, Because as long as they misunderstand it, they're still talking about it. And maybe one day that leads them to ask what it's really for, not in politics, but in their own life. Stephen set the card down, flat on the desk. No more prompts. No more pivots. He looked at her and said, You didn't come here to fight. Karoline shook her head. I came here to stay. That was the moment the audience forgot to respond. There was no cue, no signal to clap, no joke to reset the rhythm. Just two people at a desk, no longer performing, and a cross that hadn't silenced the room, but cleared it. The red camera light went dim. The audience didn't move right away. Neither did Stephen. Neither did Karoline. It was the kind of stillness that came after something stayed standing when everyone expected it to fall apart. A stagehand stepped into view with a clipboard, hesitated, and stepped back. No rap music played. No, we'll be right back. Just silence. The rarest kind in a studio like this, not from failure. From reverence. Stephen looked across the desk. Karoline looked back. No one spoke. He finally reached for the card again, folded it in half, set it aside, then said, not to the audience, not to the camera, but to her, You didn't flinch. Karoline replied, You didn't force me to. He nodded, not as approval, but acknowledgement, because what had just happened wasn't about points scored. It was about something far harder, the kind of clarity that doesn't need defense, the kind that walks into a hostile room and sits down anyway. The crew reset lights. The audience slowly exhaled. Karoline stood first. Stephen stood second. They shook hands again, this time longer. Still no smile. Still no applause. Just recognition. Backstage, a producer whispered, Should we cut that? Another replied, No, that wasn't noise. That was something else. The segment aired as is. Untrimmed. Unscored. uninterrupted. The clip aired that night. No title card, no laugh track, no summary from Stephen Colbert afterward. Just 32 minutes of steady presence, one cross, and a conversation that refused to collapse into entertainment. The reaction came fast, but it didn't sound like usual. No viral hashtags, no scorched earth think pieces. The internet didn't explode. It froze, as if trying to figure out what it had just seen, and why it wasn't sure how to respond. A few headlines tried. Colbert drops the punchline. Karoline Leavitt's faith shifts the room. No one laughed. Maybe that was the point. But most people didn't write about it. They shared it in group chats, passed it in DMs, sent it to family, not with commentary. Just, watch this. All of it. Some accused Colbert of going soft. Others said he'd been caught off guard. But in private, Stephen said something else. To a friend. In a green room. With the door closed. She didn't need the room. She brought her own. Karoline made no statement. No tweet. No article. She returned to her work, her meetings, her calendar. But in a moment backstage, to a staffer who asked how she stayed that calm, she said, "The cross does the talking. I just try not to speak over it." By the end of the week, the clip stopped trending. But it didn't disappear. It slowed. It settled. And in that stillness, it stayed. Not as an argument. Not as a triumph. But as proof that something can stand its ground without lifting its voice. 3 weeks later, Stephen Colbert stood backstage after a taping. He'd just wrapped an interview with a musician, full of laughter, applause, the usual rhythm. But his head was somewhere else. The producer handed him a revised guest list for the following week. He flipped through the pages, stopped on one name, and asked, "You remember Karoline Leavitt?" The producer nodded. "Hard to forget." Stephen said, "That wasn't a segment. That was a threshold." The producer asked, "Would you do it again?" Stephen paused, then said, "Not unless I'm ready to shut up." Across the country, Karoline sat alone at a quiet table after a town hall. She hadn't mentioned the interview, hadn't referenced it once. But a woman approached, mid-50s, hesitant, holding her phone. She didn't quote a line. She just said, "I didn't know you could sit in a place like that and still belong." Karoline smiled. "You don't have to belong. You just have to stay." The woman didn't reply. She just nodded, then walked away without taking a photo. No one turned the moment into content. No one remixed it for views. But in quiet corners, churches, classrooms, late-night text threads, it kept surfacing. That cross, that silence, that refusal to play the game. Stephen never aired a follow-up. Karoline never clarified. But neither of them forgot what it felt like to hold space that wasn't made to be kept, only honored.